Episode 1 of Sweet Tooth Season 1 begins before the Great Crumble, with Dr. Singh working tirelessly, noticing a lot of people growing sicker. What begins as a simple cough soon grows to become the deadliest virus seen in our lifetime, the H5G9 strain. Even worse, Singh's partner Rani falls ill too. In the wake of all this, hybrid babies are born. No one really knew which came first, but our attention soon turns to a hybrid out at Yellowstone National Park called Gus. Gus is half deer, half human, and grows up with his puppa, learning the ropes and growing up in the tranquil bliss of the wilderness. However, a plane flies overhead, dropping flyers out about a refuge for hybrids. Puppa simply grabs the flyer and screws it up, shielding his child from the outside world. When Gus turns 7, his father tells him all about the world outside, specifically the self-destructive way humanity consumes everything in its path. Gus is warned that humans are dangerous and warned against getting mixed up with the humans. When the attention turns to Gus's mother, some things are too painful to reveal. Puppa buries his memories of the past, both figuratively and literally. Gus does grow older though, and as a preteen, he begins to venture out further into the woods. Puppa is not happy when he finds out, worried that Gus is questioning too much. Unfortunately, this doesn't make a difference, as the arrival of a guest outside the camp prompts Puppa to head out with a shotgun and ward them away. A cry pierces the air though, as Gus is startled from trying to connect with the deer. Gus heads out with his slingshot, ready to take aim, when Puppa staggers up to the house and collapses. "He won't hurt you now," Puppa says weakly, before collapsing on the ground. When he does finally awaken, Puppa is clearly sick, but reveals the truth about Gus's mother. Her name is Birdie. Unfortunately, Puppa passes away, dying in his armchair sometime later. Gus is left all alone, but that doesn't stop him from using his imagination to keep positive. Months pass and Gus continues to use his imagination, trying to keep his spirits up while working his best to fix up the house. Unfortunately, things don't go to plan. Gus winds up starting a fire, allowing thick plumes of smoke to rise into the air. Eventually, Gus composes himself and puts out the fire, following a map on the table to the lockbox Puppa buried earlier in the episode. Within this box are money, credit cards, a photo of his mother, and a poster for the hybrid refuge. Realizing this could well link back to his mother, Gus sets out to journey across to Colorado. Unfortunately, this plan immediately goes awry when 2 hunters grab him and decide to take him east, given he's special. Just before Gus is killed, arrows come whistling through the air, followed by several gunshots, as Gus charges through the woods to escape. He doesn't get far though, as Gus learns that his fire is what's attracted these men to his house. The big man who saved Gus is actually a hunter by the name of Tommy Jett, eventually going on to help patch up his house. Tommy warns Gus about the outside world and reminds him he needs to be careful. Tommy eventually leaves, calling Gus Sweet Tooth and giving him advice about maintaining his farm before he does. Gus eventually makes his choice and decides to break the rules Puppa has given him all this time. He charges across the beautiful landscape, out the national park, and into the apocalyptic world beyond. As he spies Tommy from afar, he shouts down to him, "Big man, take me," and that's where episode 1 comes to an end. Episode 2 of Sweet Tooth Season 1 begins before the Great Crumble, as we switch focus and look at Amy, another survivor. She works as a relationship therapist, but the mundanity of her life takes a turn for the worst. This viral outbreak forces her to stay in her office too, stuck inside this self-made cage. Hours become days, and Amy becomes a prisoner in her work office, visually showcased for a really impressive slick montage. Venturing outside in the midst of this post-apocalyptic world, she passes some elephants and decides to hang out in the zoo. While she does, she lets an eagle soar overhead as we cut across the landscape and check in with Gus and the big man. The latter is obviously none too happy with Gus tagging along and tries to ditch him any way he can. However, Gus's enthusiasm and desire to get to Colorado is too much. Jep eventually begrudgingly agrees to keep him around. While he sleeps, Gus winds up eating all of Jep's food. He even accidentally burns his map too. With no resources left on him, the big man wakes up and immediately starts to panic. Gus, however, believes there's food inside the visitor center, and he's sent on alone to investigate. Well, that immediately goes wrong when he walks right into a trap. The big man eventually arrives to help, finally seeing who is inside the center. It's a normal family, as it turns out, and they give Gus and Jep food and refuge. While the adults talk, Gus and Rusty, the child of this couple, head off and play. They talk and act just like normal kids, a bittersweet reminder of what once was. It's here we find out the big man's name is Tommy. He used to be a football player, hence his muscly physique. After these pleasant introductions, he demands they let him stay for the time being. While that in itself would be fine, trouble is brewing outside. Scavengers, whom we later find out are called the Last Men, find remnants of the campfire and trace it back to the visitor center. Back inside, Tommy tries to encourage Bev to keep hold of Gus. He's doing his best to get rid of him and believes this is a way to do it. In the bedroom, Gus tucks in for the night and prepares to sleep. When Bev arrives, she looks at the photo of Birdie and mentions how it appears to be red rocks, a vital clue for where his mother may be. Meanwhile, far away from Yellowstone, we return to Aditya Singh, the doctor who opened the first episode. Rani is sick, with her hand shaking and very little vaccine left. Singh decides to head off and find Dr. Bell. This quaint refuge seems to be a living, breathing human settlement. Is it the last one? Anyway, numerous men and women wear masks while a bar has been changed to a makeshift hospital. Bell has stage 4 cancer, as it turns out, and this bombshell reveal leads her to hand over a book of her work. She wants him to continue it when she's gone, doing whatever it takes to document Rani's progress and come up with a cure. Back at the cabin, disaster strikes. Tommy looks set to leave in the middle of the night, but they have a problem. These scavengers find the visitor centre and remain hell-bent on collecting Gus. Tommy heads outside though and fights them off single-handedly. One soldier remains, and this falls on Gus to distract him. Tommy eventually kills the man, who is entranced by the appearance of a stag in the distance behind Gus. This encounter paints a target on Gus's back as he realises he can't stay and endanger this family. With supplies all packed up, Gus and Tommy both take off in a cable car, ready to begin the next leg of their journey. Tommy promises to bring him to the next town across as this unlikely partnership continues. Only new dangers are brewing. As the episode closes out, we cut across to Amy again over at the zoo. A package suddenly shows up in a parking lot, sporting a hybrid child inside. And that is where episode 2 comes to an end. Episode 3 of Sweet Tooth Season 1 begins with a new set of characters, the Animal Army. This group of enthusiastic kids are all involved in virtual reality games. When an alarm blares, they all hurry out the arcade they've been in and prepare to strike. Meanwhile, Tommy and Gus head off on the road again. They travel across vast stretches of land, eventually making it to Tommy's stash. This happens to be a kitted out bus. It's an interesting dynamic between the two here, with Gus's innocence playing off the big man's regret and poignancy surrounding his own past. In the morning, Gus learns the people after them are the originally named Last Men. They're scavengers and dangerous. Tommy is well aware of this and gives Gus a disguise to act as a human child, dressing up as a hybrid to hide that he is obviously a hybrid. There are hybrids at the town, but only in cages. Meanwhile, Singh continues to practice medicine while praying that he can keep his wife alive for long enough to see a vaccine through to completion. There are numerous depictions of different experiments and ideas within Dr. Bell's journals, echoes of words including dissection and hybrid. Right now, Singh can't bring himself to face this. Rani's hand shaking and the inability to control the virus, however, may challenge Singh's conviction here. For now, this idyllic community continues to live life like normal, but there are echoes of savagery at work here. In fact, Rani points out Hanson's burned down house, allegedly so because he decided against attending these parties. The party they attend is all fun and games until their host Doug finds his hands starting to shake. Immediately, everyone dons their masks, leaving it up to Addy to check his blood. It's not good news. He's infected, and potentially because of Rani. Everyone leaves Doug tied up in his house and sets it on fire. They all watch it burn, believing another wave of this virus is on the way. Meanwhile, Tommy and Gus make it into town, following the newly departed train up to a military checkpoint. After paying off the guard with a couple of batteries, Tommy leads Gus up and they start eating caramel apples. Tommy grabs him and takes the kid aside, telling him to stop with the weird deer shit and not to talk to anyone unless they speak first. Tommy manages to get them train tickets, but it involves giving up laces and driving a hard bargain to do so. Tommy hands over the tickets though and prepares to let them board. Only Tommy gets distracted by Gus's sense of smell, where he manages to suss out a box of medicine lying dormant in a carriage nearby. It all goes horribly wrong from here. The train departs, Tommy is tackled to the ground, and the truth about Gus is revealed. They're blindfolded and led away, eventually stopped by the Animal Army, who happen to be sporting the same skeletal outfits we saw outside the visitor centre last episode. As they show up before the pair, things are left on an ominous cliffhanger. Just before we leave the episode, however, we cut across to a guy called General Abbott, although to be fair, he might as well be called Dr. Robotnik. Anyway, he's approached by one of his men who confirms that they found her, prompting him to give the order to start packing, and that is where episode 3 comes to an end. Episode 4 of Sweet Tooth Season 1 begins with the Animal Army preparing to shoot Tommy. Gus jumps in though and saves his life. The pair are eventually carted across the wilderness to the Animal Army hideout. With Gus separate to Tommy, he's made king for the night and settles in to his newfound role. The kids mention the virus and how pollution has caused the world to sink into oblivion. Hybrids are the next stage of evolution, at least according to Bear anyway. Eventually, Bear speaks to Gus in private, warning him about Jeb and how he's one of the bad people his father warned him about. As the truth comes tumbling out, Bear reveals that Tommy is actually one of the last men. She pleads with Gus to stay with them, prompting him to instead see Tommy and hear the truth from the big man to be sure. Meanwhile, Amy and her hybrid daughter Wendy head out together to pick up supplies, including books from the library. However, the last men are still out there and continuing continuing to patrol. As day turns to night, they make it back to their hideout. In the middle of the night, Wendy and Amy are awoken by their alarms, tin cans, being set off. It turns out Wendy has a friend, and it comes in the form of a hybrid animal called Bobby that seems to be capable of talking. Dr. Singh, meanwhile, continues to come under fire back home. Nancy wants to instigate random weekly virus screenings. On top of that, she also wants to run random ones too, believing this is a new wave given there's been 3 viral cases in 6 months. There's no convincing her otherwise either, as she decides to call a council meeting to let the community decide on their fate. Gus, meanwhile, finally speaks to Tommy. He admits to being a former member of the Last Men and admits back then it was a choice between killing or being killed. Bear doesn't believe him, but Gus is determined to stand by his side. He throws his arms around Tommy and pleads with the animal army not to hurt him. It's no good, as the boys and girls take him away to cast their judgment. Gus manages to get through to Bear though, who tells them all they're not going to execute Tommy Jep. Tiger, however, is enraged and rallies the people against her. Eventually, they free Daisy, which happens to be a tiger. Gus stands in the way though, managing to calm it down and asking the tiger not to hurt Tommy. Mutiny eventually grips the group as the animal army change to Tiger's cause, leaving Bear distraught and dumbfounded. She eventually heads off alone, while Tommy and Gus manage to slip away too. Singh starts arguing with Nancy outside, but unexpectedly the horse becomes startled and kicks her, knocking the woman down and killing her. Addie and Rani decide to cover it up, while we cut across to the preserve where Amy uses a radio to welcome everyone inside, and that is where episode 4 comes to an end. Episode 5 of Sweet Tooth begins with a general arriving at Gladys Bell's house. He and his soldiers question Bell's health and demand to see her research. According to Abbott, she's been faking her illness, questions why she's not researching anymore. He even brings up her 2 children as collateral damage. The key to all of this though lies with the book she's left Dr. Singh. This holds all of her secrets and research, giving Abbott a crucial clue to its whereabouts. No longer needing Dr. Bell, he orders her to be killed. Meanwhile, Gus and Tommy continue on their way, with the big man finally caving and agreeing to journey on to Colorado after all. Despite missing the train, they decide to make it to the nearest road, but there's a problem. Bear's waiting for them. She shows Gus what she and the animal army have managed to uncover. It's part of an address, as it turns out, and something she's cooked up with her animal army team before things went sour. She's about to hitch a train, but not in the conventional sense. She's going to hop on while it's moving. Gus wants to tag along as well. Bear warns that it's going to be dangerous. After all, they have to pass through the Valley of Sorrows to get there. This happens to be a very beautiful but very toxic field of flowers, the same ones we've seen in the community Singh's in at the moment. A rickety drawbridge that absolutely will not break inevitably does just that, prompting Gus to fall all the way into the toxic flowers. Amy and Wendy, meanwhile, continue to use their time to build up their preserve, dressing up Bobby in the process. Anyway, Amy starts to communicate with the outside world, although any attempts to deviate from their original plan receives radio silence. There's still a lot of paranoia out there, and the last thing Amy needs is to disrupt the preserve and what they're building. Unfortunately, things take a turn for the worst when Bobby finds a pink ribbon on the fence. Gus awakens and starts hallucinating, leading to a touching reunion with Papa. He encourages Gus to continue on, telling him other kids are counting on him and he needs to be brave. Eventually, he wakes up with renewed clarity over the journey ahead. Meanwhile, Dr. Singh finds himself jumpy after Nancy's death. The garden is covered in these toxic flowers, and Bob arrives telling Addie that they're all counting on him. After this uneasy meeting, Addie and Rani make it to the lab together, only the package they have is out of hybrids, which throws serious doubts over whether they continue on with their research. Even worse, the place has been completely trashed. As they start to comprehend what's happened, they turn to find all the townsfolk arriving and surrounding them. They question where Nancy is, leading Addie to think on his feet. His initial suggestion that she was sick and they had to kill her works quite well. The others start to believe him until Rani starts coughing. The plan goes completely awry as they look set to suffer the same fate as both of them are sat down while gasoline is poured over the lab. A match is drawn and lit as the place is set alight. In the end of this, Rani and Addie prepare for the worst as flames light around them. Soldiers suddenly burst into building though, fronted by the general who puts out the fire and saves the pair from certain doom. And that is where episode 5 comes to an end. Episode 6 of Sweet Tooth Season 1 starts with Bear, Gus and Jep all rushing for the train. It's touch and go for a while, but they all manage to make it aboard. With no passengers, it seems like it could be easy to hide out for the time being, until the door swings shut and we see what's on the other side. It's a uniform for the Last Men. Oh no. Of course, nothing is ever easy in this new world. But now though, Gus and Bear settle in, watching the animals running freely across the rolling plains and playing I Spy. These fun games soon come to an abrupt end when Gus loses his teddy. Even worse, a mechanic suddenly appears, leading to a fight with Jep. Only, it turns out he knows this mechanic. It's Jimmy Fatman Jacobs, a fellow ball player. While they catch up, the trio suddenly realise that Gus has gone missing. He's hurried up the train, as it turns out, to try and find Doc. It's here we learn Jep actually used to have a child on White. Jimmy notices how selfless Jep is now too, and makes a point of commenting how this isn't like him. It's a clever bit of dialogue, one that shows Gus isn't the only one to have a memorable journey this season. Gus finally shows up though as they cross the Great River and make it into Colorado. Jimmy's heard of Go-Gro too, the word from the note last episode, which is short for Goss Forest Grove. Jep and Bear then soon learn that the last men are actually in charge of this train. They're in the next carriage across and heading straight for them too. With little choice, Jimmy decides to act like one of the last men and dons that uniform we saw hanging up earlier on. It immediately goes awry though, especially when they brandish a wanted poster with his face on. As Jep scrambles back onto their carriage, he shows off Gus's teddy. He managed to get Dog back after all. Jimmy promises to hold the door for them, buying the trio precious seconds so they can jump off the train. Meanwhile, General Abbott manages to find Bell's book and prepares to take off. However, Addie stops him, admitting that he has a cure. It immediately stops him in his track as Addie admits he's figured it out through using ghost DNA. With all of this knowledge stored inside Addie's head, Abbott is forced to let him go to get what he wants. Only, it turns out, Addie is lying. He doesn't have everything he needs, especially with the notes in tatters, and this time he's bought the pair is very much borrowed. At the zoo, Amy realises that the last men are closing in on them, with the pink ribbons an ominous sign of things to come. She tries to stay calm, telling Wendy to trust her as she eyes an unwelcome guest on the CCTV cameras. Realising they can't stay in the preserve any longer, the pair pack up their things and prepare to leave. With all the other hybrid children with them, Amy stays behind for now while her daughter, Bobby, and the other kids continue on. As the episode closes out, Gus, Bear, and the big man make it to Essex County, Colorado, as this journey looks to be coming to a close, and that is where episode 6 comes to an end. Episode 7 of Sweet Tooth begins up in the freezing polar ice caps as scientists make a big discovery. It seems like there's something in the ice, leading to the samples being sent on to the Fort Smith Scientific Research in, yep, you guessed it, Essex City, Colorado. This serves as an intriguing opening as we dive back in time and see more about the past. Specifically, we center on Fort Smith where Pubba, whose real name is Richard, happens to be working as a janitor. However, he takes every opportunity he can to take a peek inside the lab. News of a flu epidemic spreads as Richard notices Birdie in the lab with a quarantined patient brought in. At the bar that night, he sees Birdie again, who rocks up next to him. They both share similar taste in music and find common ground with Red Rocks. The pair down a few shots as a way of solidifying their union. Birdie is a virologist, which makes sense given what we've seen across this season so far. The chickens in the lab were part of a project she was working on, but she's been reassigned. After dedicating a year to the project, she's now forced to do something different. That's a shame because her current project is far more interesting. As Richard quizzes her about this, we learn valuable intel about this deadly strain that's been released. The project is all about microbes, and specifically finding a good microbe to help create a vaccine. This includes injecting chicken eggs with different viruses and then using a vaccine to heal them. Only this can also go horribly wrong too if they're not careful. Anyway, they eventually head home for a nightcap together. Opening up a little, Birdie admits she used to be married but she's now widowed. Her husband died from HPS, which affects 1% of people. This is what drove her on to become a virologist and try to help others. Just before they kiss, however, Birdie receives a call from work claiming the military have seized everything. Richard drives her to the lab and the pair sneak in as the military swarm outside. Back in the present, Gus, Bear and Jep make it to Sal's bar, the same one we've been seeing in these flashbacks. They sit outside and notice smoke coming out of a chimney in the distance. It's Birdie's house too, prompting Gus to rush up and pound on the door. A woman answers and reaches out to him. It's not Birdie though, but instead one of her work colleagues, Judy. As they sit down and talk, she reveals that Birdie saved her life. Unfortunately, she's no longer around. One night she packed a bag and head out to try and find Gus. That was 10 years ago, and since then no one has heard from her. It's assumed that the virus got her, but is that really true? Gus has other ideas. Fort Smith is what seems to have brought everyone together, and he believes the answers lie there. It's also where the outbreak first began. Judy hands over a key for the attic, which throws an unexpected spanner in the works as they head up and begin looking through Birdie's belongings. Among the documents, Bear notices a project called Genetic Unit Series 1, or GUS in short. That means Gus is the start of all of this, and now we see how. That night, during the flashbacks we've been experiencing, Richard and Birdie both work together to bust Gus out and evade the authorities. As we soon come to learn, Birdie isn't really his mother, and she makes a big decision, using Richard to keep Gus safe while she heads back in to burn and destroy her research. With the lockdown imminent, she promises to find him as Richard is left with this baby. This also explains why he was in isolation and hurrying across to hide out in Yellowstone National Park, and this is where episode 7 comes to an end. Episode 8 of Sweet Tooth Season 1 begins its finale with two scientists arguing outside. One is a lot more lax than the other, but Tommy quickly arrives on the scene with Louisa, who's in desperate need of medical attention. With nowhere else to go, the doctors eventually allow her to stay, but Tommy has to wait. While he sits in the waiting room, news spreads of the infection on TV, as fear-mongering grimly reports that this outbreak is going to get worse. Louisa gives birth to a beautiful baby boy, but when Tommy sees that his son is a hybrid, he rushes out without looking back. Interestingly, Dr. Singh happens to be in the elevator with him. He gives the big man some encouraging words of wisdom and leaves him with a big choice to make. In the present, Tommy and Bear contemplate whether Gus is really an experiment. If that's the case, then Bear and her animal army have believed in a lie this whole time, not dissimilar to Gus's predicament. Tommy eventually heads off to speak to him privately. Gus, meanwhile, uncovers a plane with the radio still crackling and and working. It's surrounded in greenery, but it does seem to have a radio. Unfortunately, Gus uses this to call for aid from the preserve. Why is this a problem? Well, we're about to find out. Trouble lies ahead for all of our characters. Amy looks set to face the brunt of General Abbott as he and his men surround the preserve. He monologues, allowing Amy time to prep her fireworks and set everything off in a dazzling display of explosives. With Amy holding tight and the kids all rushing off to safety, General Abbott brushes aside this firework display and allows his men to storm inside and try to find Amy. Instead, they find Bobby, Wendy, and the rest of the kids, quickly rounding them up. At the preserve, Addie and Ronnie are brought into their new home. Ronnie is kept in a separate room as collateral to motivate him to work on this cure he promised. Abbott knows he was bluffing and tells him to make enough cure so he can choose who lives and who dies. While all this is going on, Judy sits with Bear, who asks about the virus and Gus. It seems like both have their fates entwined together, but it's unknown quite how. However, Judy reveals she's been keeping all these documents safe simply because she looked at Birdie as a sister. Tommy catches up with Gus and the two discuss their past, specifically the moments inside the hospital explored earlier in the episode. Tommy decided to face his fears head on, realizing that love is what really matters. Unfortunately, when he returned to the ward, he found his son gone. Someone has taken him. This explains his connection with Gus, likening him to his own son and trying not to lose him. In a way, Gus also needs this father figure after the loss of Pubba, and the two finally reconnect. It's a really touching moment, but one that's broken by Gus revealing that he's phoned the preserve and their en route, the same preserve that's been taken over by the last men. A gunshot ricochets through the air as General Abbott shows up. He bundles Gus in a cage while Tommy has been shot and collapses in a heap on the ground, seemingly left for dead. Gus is taken to the preserve where all of our characters have now converged together. He's brought before Addie Singh, whom he whispers thanks to after he passes a snack through the bars. It startles Addie, who's taken aback by him speaking. When Johnny shows up, Addie demands to have more time with Gus. He's far too special to kill, and he likens it to a sign. Meanwhile, Bear discusses her past and how she was left alone after the last men killed her parents in cold blood. Her real name is Rebecca Walker. Her parents ended up getting sick, and Bear's little sister was a hybrid at the time. She was taken away, but Rebecca was too little to stop them. Instead, she head off and tried to find her sister. She was unsuccessful, eventually resenting humans and finding solitude in a girl called Tiger. This, of course, brings our story back to the present, as we know Tiger has turned her back on Becky and gone her own way. Judy listens to her whole story and tells the girl not to give up on her sister. Suddenly though, the phone starts ringing as they contemplate what this means. Meanwhile, a hooded figure shows up and hoists Tommy in the back of their truck with Dog. Tommy opens his eyes and shows that he's still alive. Amy has him, as it turns out, and she tells him they're going to work together and get their kids back. Elsewhere, Gus finds himself kept prisoner, meeting all the other hybrid children in the jail cell who show up and throw their arms around him in a touching sign of family. At the same time, Singh is forced to experiment on different hybrids. Johnny shows up and asks if he's ready to begin, eventually turning a saw on and preparing for the inevitable. Interestingly, Abbott watches them work from the wings. Up in the Arctic, we see the other side of this teased phone call. Connecting to Bear, this woman reveals herself to be none other than Birdie. She's still alive, and that is where season 1 of Sweet Tooth comes to an end. Thanks for watching, and do let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Smash a like or subscribe to the channel, your support is very much appreciated. I'm Greg Wheeler, and from all of us over here at The Review Geek, we'll see you on the next video.